The golden Friday evening sun poured through the windows of the family grid. A restaurant that was always loud, always busy, and always felt like a celebration. For one man and his young son, that is exactly what it was. The man, a single father, sat back in the cushioned booth, feeling a deep sense of pride that warmed him from the inside out. His son, a bright-eyed boy of 7, was buzzing with excitement, his small hands clutching a giant, colorful menu. This was their special tradition. Every Friday, if the week had been good, they came here for dinner. And this week had been more than good. His son had brought home a school report filled with such excellent marks that the father felt his heart might burst. The father worked as an electrician. His hands, often marked with small nicks and scratches, were a testament to a long week of hard, honest work. He knew the value of fixing things, of making connections that brought light into the dark. After his son's mother had left years ago, his entire world had narrowed down to two things: providing a safe, happy home and being the best father he could be. Moments like this, in this noisy restaurant, were the proof that he was on the right track. They were his reward. His phone, sitting on the table, buzzed softly. A little green light blinked, signaling a new email, probably from a client or his boss. But he didn't even glance at it. For him, this time was sacred. The outside world, with its demands and stresses, could wait. Right now, his universe was this table, the smell of frying food, and the sound of his son's voice. "Dad," the boy said, his voice serious with the importance of his decision. I think I want the superhero pancakes." The father laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Are you sure? You said you were a big man now and wanted a real dinner like me." "I know," the boy said, his brow furrowed in thought. "But the pancakes come with the chocolate mask. And it's a celebration. Celebrations can have pancakes for dinner, right?" "Absolutely, they can," the father agreed, his smile widening. "You get the superhero pancakes. I think I'll have the grilled chicken and rice." As his son happily went back to studying the pictures of the pancakes, the father's eyes gently scanned the room. He watched other families laughing, couples talking, and waiters weaving between tables with heavy trays. It was a scene of simple, everyday joy. Then his gaze drifted toward the entrance where the hostess was seating a new customer. It was a young woman, holding the hand of a very small girl. The woman looked tired. Her shoulders were curved inward, as if carrying a heavy, invisible weight. She wore a thin jacket, even though the evening had a slight chill, and it looked old and worn. The little girl, who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, clung to her mother's leg, her eyes wide and a little unsure. They were seated just a few booths away. The father watched, without really meaning to stare, as the woman helped her daughter into a seat. She then sat down herself, letting out a small, almost silent sigh as she picked up her own menu. But the way she looked at it was different from how his son had just been looking at his. There was no excitement in her eyes, no joy. Instead, her forehead was creased with a deep worry. She was studying the menu like it was a difficult math test, her fingers tracing down the list of items and their prices. A small knot began to form in the father's stomach. He knew that look. He recognized the language of that worried posture. It was a feeling he knew all too well from the harder, earlier days, right after he'd been left to raise his son alone. The terrifying feeling of counting every single penny, the cold fear of not having enough, the crushing pressure of wanting to provide a simple joy for your child and not knowing if you can. He saw the young mother lean over and point to something on the menu for her daughter, probably a picture of a fun kids' meal. The little girl's face lit up for a second, but then the mother shook her head slowly, a sad, apologetic smile on her face. She pointed to something else, lower down on the menu, something undoubtedly cheaper. The little girl just nodded, her brief moment of excitement fading into a quiet acceptance. Then, the father saw the woman do something that made his heart ache. She glanced around quickly, as if to make sure no one was watching, and then she slipped her hand into her pocket. She pulled out a small, folded stack of bills. It wasn't thick. It was a few worn-looking notes. She held them under the table and counted them, her lips moving silently. As she counted, her shoulders, which were already slumped, seemed to collapse just a little bit more. She folded the money back up and tucked it away, closing her menu with a look of quiet defeat. The contrast between the two tables was now a painful, living thing in the father's chest. At his table, there was laughter, security, and the happy debate over superhero pancakes. At their table, there was a silent struggle, worry, and the heartbreaking sight of a mother having to say no to her child not out of discipline, but out of necessity. He looked at his own son, who was now happily coloring on the kid's placemat, completely secure in the knowledge that his father could provide for him. He felt a surge of gratitude for his job, for his strength, for the fact that those days of counting thin stacks of cash were behind him. And then, looking back at the mother and daughter, he felt something else, a powerful, compelling wave of empathy. It was more than just pity. It was a deep, human understanding of her struggle. He had been in her shoes. He remembered the shame, the fear, the loneliness of it. And in that moment, watching her try to put on a brave face for her daughter, he knew he couldn't just sit there and do nothing. As the food arrived at their table, a welcome distraction from the heavy feeling growing in the father's chest. His son's eyes went wide with delight as the waiter placed a giant plate in front of him. The superhero pancakes were even more impressive in real life. A stack of 3 fluffy pancakes with a smiling face made of chocolate chips and a fruit leather mask. It was a masterpiece of simple joy. "Wow," the boy exclaimed, his voice full of wonder. "Look, Dad, he's got a blueberry for his nose." The father smiled, the sight of his son's happiness momentarily pulling his focus back to their own booth. "He looks tough," the father said, picking up his fork. "You better eat him before he flies away." His own meal, a neat plate of grilled chicken, steamed rice, and green beans, looked plain in comparison, but it smelled wonderful. He cut a piece of chicken and took a bite, but his attention kept drifting, pulled like a magnet to the other booth. The young mother and her daughter had also received their order. It was a simple plate of toast, cut into triangles, 2 small, plain plates, 2 glasses of water with no ice. That was all. The little girl looked at the toast, then up at her mother, a question in her eyes. The mother gave her a soft, tired smile and nodded, pushing the plate a little closer to her. "See, it's nice and warm," the mother said, her voice so low the father could barely hear it over the restaurant's noise. The little girl picked up a triangle of toast and began to nibble on the corner. She wasn't devouring it with the wild excitement of a hungry child. She was eating it slowly, carefully, as if making it last. The mother did the same, taking small, deliberate bites, her eyes occasionally scanning the restaurant, not looking at the people, but at the plates of food on other tables. She would see a family sharing a large, cheesy pizza, or a child happily sucking on a thick, creamy milkshake, and then she would quickly look down at her own simple meal, a faint blush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. The father watched as the little girl finished one piece of toast, and looked at the one remaining piece on her plate. She didn't ask for more. She just looked at it, then at her mother's plate, which still had a piece left. It was a level of understanding no child so young should have. She seemed to know that this was it. This was the whole meal. The mother noticed her daughter's look. Without a moment's hesitation, she picked up her own last piece of toast and placed it on her daughter's plate. "You have it, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm not so hungry." The father knew it wasn't true. He could see the tired hunger in her face. It was a mother's lie, the kind told out of pure love, a lie that meant her child would have a little more. It was a sacrifice so small, yet so enormous, it felt like a physical weight in the room. His own son, blissfully unaware, was happily chattering away with a mouthful of pancake. "Dad, can we get ice cream after? The one with the sprinkles?" The question, so normal and full of expectation, hung in the air between the two very different realities. The father looked at his son's hopeful face, then back at the mother, who was now sipping her water, her own hunger pushed aside for the sake of her child. The knot in his stomach tightened. This wasn't just a moment of sympathy anymore. It was a memory. It was a sharp, clear memory of sitting in a nearly empty apartment years ago, dividing a single can of soup between 2 bowls, telling his own son a similar story about not being so hungry. He remembered the ache in his own stomach and the greater ache in his heart, the feeling of failing to provide. He remembered the fear of the next day and the day after that, wondering how he would keep the lights on and food on the table. He had worked so hard to escape that feeling. Long hours, studying for his electrician's license, missing sleep, missing moments with his son, all to build a life where a phone buzzing with work was an annoyance, not a lifeline, where a report card could be celebrated with superhero pancakes without a second thought. And now, seeing this young woman, he saw a reflection of his past self. He saw the same silent worry, the same fierce love that puts the child first, no matter the cost. The feeling wasn't pity. It was a powerful connection, a recognition of a shared struggle. He had been given a hand up along the way, not always a big one, but a kind word from a foreman, an extra hour of work from a contractor, the understanding of a landlord who gave him 1 extra week. Those small acts had felt like miracles at the time. He pushed his plate of chicken and rice away. His appetite was gone, replaced by a rising sense of purpose. He couldn't just finish his meal, pay his bill, and walk out. He couldn't let this mother and this little girl leave this restaurant with only a memory of toast and quiet disappointment. He had the power to change their entire evening. He had the power to give them a story, a moment of unexpected joy, a memory of a time when a stranger or maybe the universe itself seemed to care. He looked at his son, who was carefully trying to cut his pancake without ruining the superhero's face. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being a human being who saw another human being in need and had the capacity to help. It was about sharing the light now that he was finally out of the dark. "Hey, buddy," he said to his son, his voice calm. "I'm just going to go to the restroom, okay? You keep guarding that pancake." "Okay, Dad," his son said, not looking up from his important work. The father slid out of the booth. He didn't walk toward the restrooms, though. He took a deep breath and turned, walking instead toward the front of the restaurant. His heart beating a little faster, his mind clear and set on a new, simple mission to turn a night of worry into a night of wonder. Asterisk walking away from the booth. The father felt a strange mix of nervousness and determination. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into a dull hum around him. His focus was entirely on the front of the room, where the hostess stand was. A woman in a manager's uniform was standing there, looking over a reservation book. She had a kind, capable face, the sort that had probably seen all kinds of situations in a busy family restaurant. As he approached, she looked up and gave him a professional, friendly smile. "Sir, is everything all right with your meal?" The father's mind went blank for a second. How exactly do you say this? He hadn't planned the words. He just knew what he needed to do. He leaned in a little closer, not wanting anyone else to hear. "Yes, the food is great, thank you," he started, his voice lower than usual. "Actually, I was hoping I could ask for your help with something a little unusual." The manager's smile became a little more curious, but she nodded, encouraging him to continue. She could see the seriousness in his eyes. He gestured subtly with his head towards the back of the restaurant. "You see that young mother and her little girl in the booth back there? The one with the toast?" The manager's eyes flickered over his shoulder for a brief moment, and a look of understanding immediately softened her features. She had seen them come in. She had probably even taken their small order. She nodded again, her expression now warm and attentive. "I'd like to pay for their dinner," the father said, the words coming out in a quiet rush. "But not just for the toast. I want to pay for a real dinner for them. A full one. Could you please take a menu over to them? Tell them they can order anything they want. An appetizer, proper main courses, desserts, whatever the little girl would like. And proper drinks, too. Juice, milk, a soda, anything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, selecting his credit card. He held it out to her. "Please," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "This is very important. They cannot know it was me. You have to tell them it's from the restaurant. Tell them it's a random act of kindness. A gift, please." He looked directly at the manager, hoping she could see the sincerity in his request. He wasn't looking for thanks or praise. In fact, the idea of being discovered made him feel uncomfortable. This wasn't about him. It was about them. It was about giving them a gift with no strings attached. A moment of pure, unexpected magic. The manager, whose name was Rosa according to her tag, looked from the man's earnest face to the credit card in his hand. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. Her eyes even looked a little shiny, as if she was touched by the request. She saw this kind of thing in holiday movies, but not so much on a regular Friday night. "Of course," she said, her voice soft and full of respect. She took the card from him carefully, as if it were something precious. "Of course, we can do that. It's a wonderful thing you're doing. Thank you," the father said, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank you so much. I'll be at my table with my son. Please just make it special for them." Rosa nodded, her professional demeanor returning, but with a new spark of mission in her eyes. "Consider it done, sir. I'll take care of everything personally." With that, the father turned and walked back towards his booth. His heart was still beating fast, but now it was with a feeling of anticipation. He felt light, as if a weight he hadn't even known he was carrying had been lifted. He slid back into his seat across from his son. The boy looked up, a smear of chocolate on his cheek. "You were gone a long time, Dad." "Sorry, buddy," the father said, picking up his fork again. Suddenly, his appetite was back. "I just had to take care of something." Back at the hostess stand, Rosa was already in motion. She picked up the full, clean menus and caught the eye of the waitress who was serving that section. She whispered a few quick, clear instructions. The waitress, a young woman, listened, her eyes widening in surprise. Then she smiled and nodded, taking the menus from Rosa. The father watched this entire silent exchange from his booth. He saw the waitress approach the mother and daughter's table. He saw her say something, and then he saw her place the two large menus in front of them. The young mother looked up, confused. She shook her head slightly and pointed to their nearly empty plate of toast, as if to say, "No, we've already ordered." But the waitress was prepared. She leaned down, her body language open and kind. She spoke to the mother, and even from a distance, the father could see the script being followed. He saw the waitress gesture around the restaurant in a general way. He saw her say the words, "It's a gift from us." The mother's reaction was exactly what he had both hoped for and dreaded. Her face, which had been etched with tired worry, first showed pure confusion. Then, as the waitress continued to explain, her expression shifted to disbelief. She shook her head again, this time more forcefully, her hands coming up as if to refuse. She was proud. She didn't want charity. This was the critical moment. The father held his breath. He saw the waitress lean in even closer, speaking with gentle insistence. She was clearly telling her that it was already taken care of, that it was no trouble, that it was a policy, a happy surprise for a lucky family. She encouraged her to look at the menu, to order anything at all. The mother looked down at her daughter, who was watching the whole thing with big, curious eyes. She looked at the hope starting to bloom on her little girl's face. The fight seemed to drain out of her. The wall of pride crumbled, not into defeat, but into overwhelmed gratitude. She looked back at the waitress and gave a small, hesitant nod. Then, she did something that made the father's throat feel tight. She brought her hand up to her mouth, and her shoulders trembled just once. It was a gesture of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden alone, and had just felt a pair of hands help to lift it, if only for a moment. The waitress smiled warmly, and left them with the menus. The little girl immediately scrambled onto her knees in the booth to look at the big, colorful book of food. The mother wiped quickly at her eyes with her napkin, then leaned in to look at the menu with her daughter. This time, her posture was different. The slump was gone. She was pointing at pictures, and this time, there was no sad shake of the head. This time, there was a real, tentative smile. The father let out a long, slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The first part of his mission was accomplished. The hardest part was over. Now, the real magic was about to begin. Back in his own booth, the father tried to act normal. He took a bite of his chicken, which was now just warm, and asked his son about the superhero pancake. Was it winning the fight? The boy launched into an elaborate story about the pancake's powers, but the father's attention was split. A part of him was listening and nodding, making the right sounds at the right time, but the larger part of him was watching the scene unfold a few tables away. He felt like a director who had set a play in motion, and was now watching the actors bring it to life. He saw the waitress return to the mother and daughter's table, notepad in hand, ready to take their new order. The little girl was practically vibrating with excitement, pointing at something on the menu. The mother was smiling now, a real, proper smile that completely transformed her face. It was a shy smile, one that was still getting used to feeling happy, but it was there. She looked up at the waitress and gave their order. The father couldn't hear the words, but he could see the mother's lips move, and he saw the waitress write it down with an encouraging nod. Then, the most amazing thing began to happen. The restaurant, which had just been background noise before, now seemed to become a silent partner in the secret mission. The kitchen doors swung open and shut, and soon, the waitress emerged with a tray. But it wasn't just their food. It was a procession of dishes. First, she brought a plate of golden brown mozzarella sticks, sitting in a little pool of red marinara sauce. The cheese stretched in long, gooey strings as the waitress placed the plate down. The little girl's eyes looked like they were about to pop out of her head. She clapped her small hands together with a quiet, happy sound. The father watched as the mother picked up a cheese stick, blew on it to cool it down, and handed it to her daughter. The little girl took a careful bite, and a look of pure, uncomplicated bliss spread across her face. She nodded vigorously at her mother, her mouth full. The mother took one for herself, and she'd had that same look of someone tasting something delicious after a very long time. But the parade of food wasn't over. Next came the main courses. The waitress brought two large plates. One had a cheeseburger, tall and juicy, with a pile of crispy French fries leaning against it. The other plate had a smaller, kid-sized version of the same burger, with a smaller mountain of fries. It was clear they had ordered the same thing, a simple, happy meal to share. The little girl looked from her own perfect little burger to her mother's big one, her smile so wide it must have hurt her cheeks. The mother just kept shaking her head in quiet disbelief, as if she had walked into a dream and was afraid she might wake up at any moment. Then came the final touch. The waitress returned one more time, holding two tall, frosty glasses. They were filled with thick, pink milkshakes, topped with a mountain of whipped cream and a single, bright red cherry on each. She placed one in front of the mother and one in front of the daughter. The little girl stared at the milkshake as if it were a treasure from a storybook. She carefully picked up the long spoon next to it and dove into the whipped cream. She came up with a spoonful of the white fluff, and a big dab of it landed on the tip of her nose. Instead of wiping it off, she started giggling. It was a real, bubbling, infectious giggle, the sound of a child who had forgotten all her worries. The mother heard that laugh, and her own face just melted. The last bit of tension and worry seemed to evaporate from her shoulders. She reached over with her napkin and gently wiped her daughter's nose. And then she started laughing too. It was a beautiful, musical sound, a sound of relief and joy all mixed together. For the first time all evening, she looked her age. She looked young and light and free. The father watched this entire transformation. He saw the two of them, no longer just a tired mother and a quiet daughter, but a happy family sharing a wonderful, unexpected feast. They were talking animatedly now, the mother pointing to the burger, the daughter showing her a French fry. They were sharing the mozzarella sticks, dipping them into the same sauce. They were connected not by their struggle, but by the sudden, wonderful surprise. He felt a warmth spread through his own chest, a feeling so deep and satisfying it was better than any meal. This was the real payment. This was the astonishing thing. It wasn't the act of paying the bill itself. The truly astonishing thing was the power of a simple act of kindness, to change the entire atmosphere of a person's life, even if just for one evening. It was seeing the weight of the world lift from someone's shoulders and be replaced, even temporarily, by the lightness of joy. He looked at his own son, who was now finishing the last of his pancake, completely unaware of the quiet drama that had just taken place. The boy was happy in his own world, and that was exactly how it should be. The father realized then that he wasn't just giving a meal to a stranger. He was giving them a memory. He was giving that little girl a story she might tell one day, about the magical time a restaurant gave them a feast for no reason at all. He was giving that mother a night where she didn't have to say no, a night where she could see her daughter laugh without a care in the world. And in doing so, he was creating a memory for himself, a memory of the night he learned that the greatest reward for his own hard work was the ability to secretly, quietly, make someone else's world a little brighter. The father and his son were finishing their own meals. The boy was scraping the last bits of chocolate and syrup from his plate, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. The father had eaten his food, but the real feast for him had been watching the quiet celebration happening across the room. He saw the waitress bring generous slices of chocolate cake to the mother and daughter, each with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on the side. The little girl let out a small, happy gasp. It was more food than they could possibly finish, but that wasn't the point. The point was the abundance, the feeling of having more than enough for once. After a few more minutes, the father decided it was time for them to leave. He wanted to be gone before the mother and daughter finished to make sure the secret remained safe. He caught the eye of the waitress and made a small writing motion in the air, signaling for the bill. She nodded and brought it over promptly. He opened the leather folder. Inside was his bill, and paper clipped behind it was the bill for the mother and daughter. He didn't even look at the total. He didn't need to. He simply took out his wallet, placed his credit card inside both bills, and handed it back to the waitress. She gave him a knowing, appreciative smile and walked away to process the payment. While they waited for the card to come back, his son, who had been quiet for a while, looked up at him. The boy's face was thoughtful. He had been watching his dad, and he had seen the looks, the quiet intensity. "Dad," the boy said, his voice soft and serious. "You helped them, didn't you? That lady and the little girl." The father was taken completely by surprise. He had been so focused on being secretive, he hadn't considered how much his own son was observing. He looked into his son's earnest eyes and knew he couldn't lie to him. This was a moment that mattered. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and lowered his voice so only his son could hear. "What makes you say that, buddy?" The boy shrugged his small shoulders. "I saw you talk to the lady at the front, and then that waitress brought them all the new food, and you've been watching them. You had your thinking face on." The father smiled. His son was more perceptive than he gave him credit for. He reached out and put his hand on his son's. "Sometimes," he began, choosing his words carefully, "when you are lucky enough to build your own table and have a good meal on it, you look around, and if you see someone who doesn't have a place to sit, or whose plate is empty, you make a little room. You share what you have. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but it's a good thing to do." The boy processed this, his brow furrowed in thought. "So, you bought their dinner for them?" "Yes, I did," the father admitted. "But the important part is that they don't know it was us. That makes the gift pure. It just becomes a happy surprise from the world. Do you understand?" The boy nodded slowly, a look of deep understanding dawning on his young face. He didn't fully grasp all the complicated reasons, but he understood the core of it. Helping in secret was a special kind of magic. "That was a good thing to do, Dad," he said simply. That simple statement, coming from his son, meant more to the father than any thank you from the mother ever could. He had not only helped a struggling family, he had just given his son a living lesson in kindness. The waitress returned with his credit card and the receipts. He signed them quickly, added a generous tip for her wonderful help, and put his wallet away. Ready to go, champ. As they stood up to leave, the father allowed himself one last glance. The mother and daughter were leaning their heads together, laughing about something. The little girl had a smudge of chocolate cake on her chin, and her mother was dabbing at it with a napkin, her own face relaxed and bright. They were wrapped up in their own little bubble of happiness, completely unaware of the two figures slipping out of the restaurant. The cool evening air felt fresh on the father's face as they stepped outside. The parking lot lights were on, casting a soft glow. He took his son's hand, and the small, warm grip felt perfect in his. Walking towards their car, the father felt a profound sense of peace. The stress of his work week, the constant pressure of providing, it all felt distant now. He had done something that mattered in a way that balancing a budget or fixing a wiring problem never could. He had touched another human life with kindness, and in doing so, he had strengthened the bond with his own son. He looked down at the boy, who was skipping a little beside him, humming a happy tune. "So," the father said, "superhero pancakes for dinner. Was it a good celebration?" "The best," his son declared, squeezing his hand. "And the secret mission was the best part." The father smiled, looking up at the night sky. The world could feel like a hard and complicated place sometimes, but it was also a place where a tired mother could be given a reason to laugh, where a little girl could go to bed with a full stomach and a happy heart, and where a father could show his son what it truly means to be strong. It was a place where simple, quiet acts could send ripples of good out into the dark. And those ripples, he thought, were the most astonishing thing of all.